guys, it's your girl Kamika. Welcome back to the Makeba channel. I am sending my prayers out to all of you, and I'm hoping that you all in this time of self-quarantine are in fact self-quarantine and are in fact practicing good hygiene. I know I don't have to ask y'all or tell y'all that because this is what we do, but still I just gotta say it. I hope you guys are practicing good hygiene techniques, and I also hope that you guys are practicing mindful, respectful, and appropriate social distancing so that we can get over this COVID-19 situation as soon as possible, regardless of what you think or believe about it or how you think it came to pass or what you think it is. I think it is very important that we be better safe than sorry. So please do that because I want to see you guys on the other side of this. All right? So today we are not going to be doing a Friday Facts, although I may have the same outfit on when I do a Friday Facts video because I'm self-quarantined and I got time today. Today I got time, cuz. So, but I thought that since we were here together that I would give you a little bit of a review of the series Self-Made, the inspired by the life of Madam C.J. Walker, the Self-Made miniseries on Netflix, that I would give you kind of a review of it, and that you would give you something to chew on, something to think about, something to enlighten you, and maybe allow you to pick up a few more books while you have time to self-quarantine, right? Give you a chance to inform yourself on some really great women in Black history, and come out of it thinking a little more critically and having a little more details and information and feeling a little more, empowered. So right now, let's get into my discussion on Self-Made and some of the issues that I have with the creative license that was taken by the producers. All right, stay tuned. So hopefully you've all had a chance to watch the four-part miniseries on Netflix entitled Self-Made, which is the story and the inspired story of Madam C.J. Walker's life. And hopefully you've had a chance, if you didn't already know, to learn about a wonderful woman by the name of Madam C.J. Walker, who she was and how she contributed to the lives of Black people in general, not just in the beauty world, but the lives of Black people in general. Hopefully you have. But if you haven't, I'll give you a quick little primer on it. But I also want to inform you about another really wonderful woman that you should have known about. But for some strange reason, you probably don't. In addition to that, I want, as I said before, to talk about the creative license, the problematic creative license that Netflix producers took with this miniseries. And I want to give you the correct information as we know it so that you can be more informed. One of the things that I struggle with as a teacher, teaching of the Bible, teaching of what I teach a lot of different things. So when I'm dealing a lot of times with people that I'm just teaching in a classroom setting or a Bible study setting, or just people when I'm teaching my babies in life, one of the things that I struggle with most is that they often believe that video or theatrical or media productions of something are the truth, that they're factual and they're able to hang their hats on them. And that's very problematic because most of the time, a lot of your media productions, your film productions, have taken serious creative license with people's lives. And because of that, they further perpetuate a lot of times negative tropes and stereotypes about people rather than, and they also make Black people especially very two-dimensional rather than allowing Black people to be fully living three-dimensional, four-dimensional if you consider the spirit, and be fully living, breathing, and tell a full story that isn't a degenerative story, that isn't a story about negativity, but shows how they overcame through life circumstances in whatever century or period that they were living in. And so Self-Made does that very thing where with the creative license that it takes, it doesn't allow Madam C.J. Walker to be the fully phenomenal woman that she is. It's inspiring. I'm not going to take that away. And the production value of the miniseries is beautiful, but it's still really truncates who Madam C.J. Walker, I believe, was. And it also perpetuates negative stereotypes that we deal with a lot in the black community. And just by all historical accounts, those negative stereotypes were, of course, an issue in her life and in the lives of her contemporaries, but they weren't the issues. And I just want to say here that as a proud black woman, I am a lot more than the negative stereotypes and perceptions that have been put upon me and the struggles that I've had to endure at this ripe old age that I've gotten to, praise God. I am so much more. I'm so much more vibrant, so much more colorful, no pun intended. I'm so much more living. And so were Madam C.J. Walker and Annie Minerva Turnbull Pope Malone. And we're going to talk about her. So stay tuned. So the number one issue, and it's not in order of importance, but it is the one that kind of came to my mind first, is a common misconception is that Madam C.J. Walker was the first black millionaire or the first self-made black female millionaire. And I want to just dispel that myth right now in that she was not the first black millionaire, self-made female, or other. She was not the first black millionaire. We had a number of black millionaires at the turn of the century when Madam C.J. Walker came into her prime. So she wasn't the first black millionaire, and as a matter of fact, her mentor, who we're going to get into, Miss Annie Malone, was already a millionaire, I believe, by records, I believe, when Madam C.J. Walker came on the scene. She was already doing a damn thing when she came on the scene. So we want to go ahead right now and dispel a little bit of that marketing sorcery, wizardry, and let you know that Madam C.J. Walker was not the first millionaire of any type at the time, but that does not take away from her importance and our appreciation of her, but she just wasn't the first. So if you're going to teach your kids anything, don't teach them that she was the first. Teach them that she was one of the first black millionaires. There were some there, the first black ones in a sense, this financial system that we have now, and those that are coming out of slavery, and that's where she fits. But don't say that she was the first of it. It doesn't take away from her greatness, though. Now, getting into the actual miniseries, a big issue that I had with the miniseries, even though, and this will be the only time I use this disclaimer, the production value was beautiful. It was a very beautifully made miniseries. The colors were beautiful. The set design was beautiful. The wardrobe was beautiful. The hairstyles on all the sister girls were beautiful. The black men were gorgeous. They looked good. Their skin looked good. Everybody was happy. It was nice. There were some scenes, especially when there was a boxing match that was, I can't think of who the boxer was at the time, but it was just such a beautiful thing to see them all together and celebrating and all different shades and all looking good and all looking like they smell good. Production value on this was beautiful, but there's still some problems that we have to look into that you can't hide with production value and symbolism. We just can't do that, right? And one of the biggest issues that I had that seems to be overarching for the whole miniseries is that they, in an effort to be creative, they ended up perpetuating some persistent problems that we have in the black community that were not necessarily the problems that these two women were having. And that is, they chose to pit dark against light, team dark skin versus team light skin, and they also chose to pit two women that had a lot of similarities and a lot of common life experiences against each other, rather than showing those similarities and showing how they worked well together and showing how one mentored and fed into the other one and helped the other one develop, and how the other one took off from it, and how they both continued to be successful in the same and similar tracks, and how they did have an honest conflict, but the conflicts weren't based on phenotype that we know of. So let's get into that a little bit. Madam C.J. Walker was born Sarah Breedlove in, let me go back here. She was born Sarah Breedlove in December of 1867. She was the descendant of sharecroppers who had once been slaves. Her parents were Owen and Minerva Anderson Breedlove in Delta, Louisiana. They had been slaves before the Civil War, and that's where she was born. When she got around the age of 7, she was orphaned, and her older sister, Lavinia, took her in and raised her. Right. She later got married at the age of 14. And in an effort to get away from her abusive brother-in-law, Jesse Powell, who was married, I believe, to Lavinia, she got married to a man by the name of Moses McWilliams. They began to live their own life, and they had a daughter by the name of Lilia Bundles, or Lilia McWilliams, excuse me, at that time in 1885. And then he died 2 years later, and she moved to St. Louis. Similarly, there is a woman by the name of Annie Minerva Turnbull Pope Malone. In the miniseries, her name is Annie, no, not Annie, Addie Monroe. Addie Monroe is based on Annie Malone. Addie Monroe is played by, who is she played by? She is played by the beautiful Carmen Ejogo. And by the way, Madam C.J. Walker, niece Sarah Breedlove, is played by the beautiful Octavia Spencer, right? So Carmen Ejogo plays, who is a fair-skinned, taller woman of African descent, plays Addie Monroe in the miniseries, who is based on Annie Malone in real life. Now, let me tell you who Annie Malone in real life was and why I have an issue with the separation rather than the bringing them together. Annie Minerva Turnbull was born in 1865 in Metropolis, Illinois. She was the 10th of 11 children. She was also the direct descendant of slaves. Her father, Robert, and her mother, Isabella Cook Turnbull, were both slaves as well. They were poor farmers, but they were slaves as well before the Civil War. Now, I want to pause there for a minute because here you have an area where I believe the miniseries could have really got into if it was intending to inform us rather than just entertain us. Because you have a woman in the North born in Illinois and a woman in the South born in Illinois, pretty much of the same circumstances. So oftentimes we hear with our historical teachings that people in the North were never enslaved, and that's not true. I just got into a really thorough and great discussion with a friend of mine yesterday, and he talked about the plight of black people in the Union and later the Confederacy and everything. He really got into it. I'm not going to get into it here, but I'm going to say, just to highlight, that you have two women that were born on opposite sides of the line, the Mason-Dixon line, one in a free Illinois, perceivably, but she was a descendant of slaves, so she was born free, and then one in the Confederate South, the Dixie South, in Mississippi, okay? And she was born free, but she's also the descendant of slaves. They also have a 2-year age difference. And so Annie Turnbull later is also, here's another point of similarity, she is orphaned, I think, at around the age of 9, and her older sister also takes her on as her charge and moves with her to Peoria, Illinois, and helps to raise her up. So here we have two women. Not only that, let me go here. Then, no. Let me see. What do I want to say? So here we have two women whose genesis, who have the same genesis. It's very, very similar, just two different sides of the line. They are more similar than they are different. Isn't that crazy? Based on just those topical points of their early lives. Now, here's the next issue that I have with the separation of self-made. And that is this. These women are depicted as vastly different in their phenotypes. Phenotype is your physical appearance. So, versus genotype, which is your genetic makeup. That's the teacher in me. I just want to make sure y'all know that, okay? All right. So, and the phenotype of Sarah Breedlove is one of a shorter, more compact, stodgy, framed, darker skinned black woman with kinkier, coilier, tighter, what's often considered nappier hair that is not acceptable supposedly in society. The phenotype of Addie Monroe is one of a taller, more lithe or slimmer framed, light skinned mulatto type of black woman with long flowing hair, reddish brown flowing hair, who not only recognizes that her phenotype is different, but seems to gloat in that her phenotype is different, and that she is seen in society as superior to that of Madam C.J. Walker. That never happened. And it's not true. It is so not true. And it's so problematic because number one, it's not true. But number two, it is perpetuating team light skin, team dark skin, when team light skin, team dark skin was not the issue that these women had to begin with. If you actually look at pictures of both women, you will find that they're both of a shorter stature, and both are brown-skinned women that are the descendants of slaves. Now, mind you, I was listening to, I think it was either Layla Lynn or the Impressive Channel, and they brought up, I think, a 1920 or 1910 census. She brought it up where she said Annie Turnbull Malone was listed as mulatto. But I do want to tell you guys this. Here's a little bit of history, and I've done my family's history back to the 1700s on one side. Racial designation was not something that was spoken to the census taker. Racial designation was by eye only. So if the census taker came to your home and looked at you, and you may have been a fairer skinned black woman, or were just a brown skinned woman but living in higher standards, you may have been pinned as mulatto or designated as mulatto when you were black. Right? Because mulatto in our eyes is still considered black. You know, we got that whole one drop rule. But still, Annie Turnbull Malone, for all intents and purposes, we do not know of as being mulatto. And when you look at her photos, depending on the lighting, they look very similar in shade and complexion. Now, Madam C.J. Walker does have a fuller figure. She is a fuller figured woman than Annie Malone. But that wasn't the bone of contention between them. So I have a serious issue with self-made perpetuating the trope of separation between light and dark skin rather than speaking to the similarities of these two women and how they were more alike than they were probably separate or different, and how that kind of tenacity and what they developed and then that work ethic is such a wonderful thing to have, and why they succeeded. So now continuing on with common problematic tropes that self-made perpetuated. And just so that you guys understand what a trope is a literary device that is used to describe, I'm simplifying it, not oversimplifying it, I'm simplifying it, but it's a literary trope used to describe, literary device used to describe recurring cliches, motifs, or ideas. And so we see it a lot in our media, in media that is directed to black people, but actually you see, it doesn't matter what race you are. There are common tropes that are perpetuated in media for every single race and class of people, i.e. Latina women are always portrayed as sexy sirens, hot tamales, very sexually charged. Asian women are always personified as soft and docile, very meek and very never one to lift their voice and never one to be strong and reactive to anything. And black women, we have a whole list of tropes that we are seen as, you know, the sapphire, which is the hypersexualized, sassy, booty twerking, you know, sexy siren type. Then we also have the mammy, that is the woman that is big and rotund and jolly and very asexual. She's not sexual to anybody. Nobody looks at her and wants to sleep with her, right? And she is wonderful to all the white kids, but terrible to all the black kids, right? And then we have a whole bunch of other tropes that come in there that I can't really think about right now, but you got your Bonita Portrayals and your Elizabeth from Sanford and Son is a spin off of another trope that I can't think of what the name of that one is right now, but we have a whole bunch of different ideas and cliches that we are presented as in media. Another one would be, I think Cree Summer talked about this, how she was always the quirky black uh, girlfriend, but never the star of the show. There are certain tropes, certain motifs that are perpetuated in media for us, right? Anyway, that's a trope, and so self-made to me is full of those tropes again. I don't know if they just make good TV or if that's what we've come to be used to, that they think we need it or we expect it, or we won't be able to recognize uh, robust characters without that. I don't know. But Self Made does that too. Not only has it pit light skin against dark skin, not only has it created separation between two women that were contemporaries in that fourth season, were actually in each other's circle and building with one another. It also then turns around and it perpetuates the trope of a light woman being a weak damsel in distress, right? Because in the series, Addie Monroe uh, is subject to sexism, uses her sex kittenish kind of ways to kind of get what she wants, and she's subject to physical abuse. So during the show, when Addie moves from St. Louis to Indianapolis, right, which never happened, right? When Addie moves to St. Louis to Indianapolis, she comes with a black eye. And so when Madam C.J. Walker and her daughter Lilia just happen to be walking down Main Street and they see her, they go to see her at a beauty salon, and she comes out to talk to them, in a sense to gloat, to say, you know what, I'm a black woman on Main Street. She has a beautiful face that is made up, right? But you could see that she has a black eye. And so they're portraying this light-skinned woman as subject to physical abuse in a way that the dark-skinned woman would never be subject to physical abuse. It's inferred, right? Excuse me, not inferred, implied. Then, in addition to that, during a conference with Booker T. Washington, Addie Monroe is allowed to come on stage, and the idea is that she's going to be coming on stage to speak about in a sense, feminine empowerment and about her business, and to uplift the black race by also uplifting the black woman. But Booker T. Washington does not allow her to even speak. Well, he allows her to speak, but he doesn't allow her to speak about her business. He, in a sense, relegates her to eye candy for all the men, and even speaks about her phenotype to the men, and how she's such a lovely specimen of a woman, but he doesn't let her speak about her business. And he doesn't speak, when he does speak about her business, which is very, very little, he doesn't speak about it as if it is a venture that anybody should ever look into. And I can't remember exactly what it said, but he really relegates her to a position of help, right? And while at the same time exercising sexism over her by calling attention to her body and her physical attributes rather than to her mind and her business acumen. Now, I don't recall from what I've read about Annie Malone that this ever happened, but I will tell you that Annie Malone does find her way even today into speeches of dignitaries. I know many of y'all don't like Trump, I get it, but Trump even brought her up in a speech that he had back in 2019. He talks about Annie Turnbull Malone and her contributions, as well as a number of other black prominent dignitaries at the time. So we find, I'm presuming that never happened, where Booker T. Washington talked about her body rather than her business prowess, if she was ever on the stage with him. Now, the opposite, or the juxtaposition of that trope, is that there's always, for every weak light-skinned woman trope, there is a strong, independent, controlling dark-skinned woman trope. And so Madam C.J. Walker and Sarah Breelove is the knee of Madam C.J. Walker. So she's Sarah Walker, but she became Madam as a term of endearment and a title given to her by her team, or the wife of C.J. Walker. So that's how that is. I just keep So when I say Sarah Breela, please know I'm talking about Madam C.J. Walker, right? But she is portrayed in the miniseries as a short, stout, dark-skinned woman with problematic hair, with insecurity issues, right? She's extremely controlling. She's very overbearing to every person that she comes into contact with concerning her business, right? She's overbearing and controlling and domineering to her daughter, creating in her daughter kind of a childlike way of looking at life. By the way, her daughter is played by Tiffany Haddish. It's a strange, role for Tiffany Haddish, but still, somebody said Tiffany Haddish plays Tiffany Haddish in everything that she's in, and I have to agree. Tiffany Haddish, it was weird. It was weird. It wasn't bad, but it was just like Tiffany Haddish, somebody said doesn't have range, and I wouldn't say that Tiffany, and she doesn't have range, but Tiffany Haddish hasn't learned how to portray a character and decrease herself. Tiffany Haddish, when she was playing Lilia Bundles, it was like Tiffany Haddish was at a costume party to me. But she tried, and I'm not going to knock her for it, and I want her to continue to get these kinds of roles so that she can stretch herself. But it is true, Tiffany Haddish persona as Tiffany Haddish was a lot more prominent than the persona of Lilia McWilliams portrayed by Tiffany Haddish. I will say that. But in the miniseries, Tiffany Haddish is mother, Madam C.J. Walker, is very overbearing, very domineering, very controlling of her. And in addition to that, she's also very emasculating to her beautiful husband, Mr. Blair Underwood, honey. Blair Underwood plays Sir C.J. or Mr. C.J. Walker, Charles Walker. And oh my God, Blair Underwood just is one of those men that just gets finer with time. He is good aging wine, if you ask me. I wasn't particular about Blair Underwood when he was younger, when he was on, I think he was on L.A. Law and a couple other shows. And he was a nice looking guy. But now Blair could get it. Because Blair is gorgeous. He is gorgeous, and he's getting older. His skin is deepening, and he just is aging so well. And he did such a good job as C.J. Walker, and he did a very good job against the phenomenal Octavia Spencer, who plays Madam C.J. Walker. They just really were well matched. Blair wasn't overpowered by her in his portrayal of C.J. Walker. It wasn't like he was an afterthought. He was a prominent member of this cast, and it was very obvious. So he did an excellent job at that. But going back to what I was saying about the problem with this creative license that they took, in taking some of the creative license with Madam C.J. Walker, and they really pit her as controlling, overbearing, and emasculating to her man, making C.J. Walker feel like he was just to help, and he was just there to help her to reach her end means, her goals, when in real life that wasn't true at all. C.J. Walker had tenacity. Madam C.J. Walker had tenacity. She had grit. She had to have it because she was a child of slaves that had been in abusive situations, whose first husband had died, after they got married, 2 years, I think, after they got married, and who had to transition from a southern way of living to a northern kind of Midwest way of living, and she had to make it happen because she wanted to go from being a sharecropper to a washerwoman, and a washerwoman to a CEO. So she had to have tenacity and focus. Annie Malone had to have tenacity and focus that may have come off as stronger or more than what was common then in women at the time, but it really wasn't. She was making it happen. It's the same thing we all do today. She had bills to pay, and nobody was going to pay her bills for her. But I never got the impression from the real Madam C.J. Walker that she was any of these things, that she was anything other than a madam, that she was anything other than a lady. She just, like I said, had tenacity and had business acumen and know-how, and she had confidence. And from what I understand, her husband, C.J. Walker, had that same. They matched each other. So he was a good person for her to build with, because they built together because they both had ambition and drive, tenacity, and a vision. And they put their skills together and built this empire that they built, right? So that's problematic. Okay, so we've talked about several issues that the creative license of Self-Made created. Let me talk about just a few more, and we'll go, and then we'll be done. Right? Okay. So the next issue that I had is the errors of location, and I, the reason that the locations are in error or problematic, or the errors of location are problematic for me, is because it goes right on back to erasing black people from areas that may be predominantly non-black, but that we injected ourselves in and turned the environment and the society around it. So you guys, so I forgot to put this blurb in here, so I want to make sure that you guys get it. So in the issue with creative license, when it comes to locations, you need to understand that Madam C.J. Walker went from Delta, Louisiana to Mississippi, from Mississippi to St. Louis. Then when she started her own brand, she went to Denver, Colorado. It is important for you to know that she went to Denver, Colorado and not Indianapolis. Number one, because she didn't go to Indianapolis. And then number two, because you have to understand that as African Americans or as black people, we're not often considered as part of the founding fathers or pioneers of cities such as Denver, Colorado, or other places that now today seem predominantly white, but we were actually there. We were there in the gold rush. So she went to Denver, Colorado and plied her trade and made a killing there. And so it's very important that we don't erase her from that environment because she was there and she was thriving. Mrs. Malone went from Illinois to Peoria, Illinois to St. Louis, and then she participated in the St. Louis World Fair. But I don't think that she went Brooklyn. I think she went to Brooklyn, Illinois. But her home was in the state of Illinois, and that's pretty much where she plied her trade. But she did have a national company, so she traveled a lot. So it's important to note for her as well that she was in regions of the country that we as black people are not regularly associated with, but that we did have a very good presence in. Okay, so in listing some of the other creative license issues that I had with Self-Made, I believe I got a little bit ahead of you where I didn't give you a little bit more information about the wonderful Annie Malone. So I want to tell you about who she was and why the whole portrayal of Addie Monroe as an inspiration based on Annie Turnbull Malone was so problematic. So we already talked about the phenotypes weren't that much different between the two women. We already talked about the similarities in their foundations. But what the show doesn't tell you, and what it does negatively, is it makes it appear as if because of those issues that they had interpersonally in the black community and amongst these two women, that Addie Monroe didn't see the value in Sarah Breedlove, and that she would not aid in her ascension. She wouldn't aid in her becoming a better businesswoman, and that is the furthest thing from the truth. As a matter of fact, Annie Turnbull Malone, or Annie Malone, who, like I said, is based on, was already a thriving businesswoman when Sarah Breedlove got to St. Louis. Not only was she a thriving businesswoman, I believe she was already a millionaire by that time, and she had created a company that was named Poro. So here's something. Annie Malone took an age-old recipe for sulfated hair grease. And let me go back. Annie Malone, similar to me, had a science background and was a bit of a chemist, right? Her sister was also, I believe, an herbalist doctor. She had moved into herbalism. And so Annie Malone took those two disciplines, put them together, and started her own salon, right? When she started her salon, she began to focus on healthy hair care, and she had a real focus on hair texture. So it really resonates with me, because if you have listened to me enough, you know that I am someone that will tell you over and over again that hair is not racial, it's textural. And when you are looking for products for your hair, look for products that will work on your texture. Forget about products that have, let's say, white women on the marketing. If the product is going to work for your texture of hair, use that product. You'll be happy that you did. And so Annie Malone, it resonates with me because she had a similar understanding and a similar belief behind that. And so she was really concerned about textures of hair, and she created an herbal, or it wasn't herbal, but it had some herbal botanicals in it. She created a way for black women to relax their hair with a chemical straightener that wasn't damaging to the scalp and the hair follicles. So she incorporated a little bit of that herbalist knowledge from her sister. She incorporated a bit of her chemistry background. And it wasn't her sister, actually, it was her aunt. And she created products and systems for hair care based on that. Now, her wonderful hair grower salve or hair grease was not necessarily her own formula. It was an age-old formula that you can often get out of Amish almanacs or various almanacs. And it was a blend of various oil fats and sulfur. Today we would call it, I think, fluoridated sulfur. It was very similar to Sulfur 8. I'll give them that shout out here. It's very similar to products like that. And it really dealt with women that had psoriatic or hair loss problems based on bad hygiene. So when Sister Girl tells y'all to shampoo and condition your hair, shampoo and condition your hair weekly, no more than every 2 weeks, so you don't have these issues. See, these women were having those issues because their scalps weren't getting clean. And so she was very big on hair hygiene, hair and scalp hygiene, and then putting a product on it that would help the scalp heal quickly and allow the hair to thrive. So that was really what was going on with her. So she created that product and marketed it as the popular wonderful hair grower, right? And so and then I think she also patented the pressing comb. I don't believe she created the pressing comb because I'm aware that the pressing comb was already in production in France in the earlier 1800s and I believe the late 1700s, but she patented a version of it here in the US. I think she changed some of the tines or the teeth on the comb, and she made it so that it could be used for more textured hair, but she didn't create the pressing comb. And I think Madam C.J. Walker later on changed it even more and then repatented it. So that's kind of where that came from. But that's what Annie Malone did. Then Annie Malone got married a couple times. She divorced, Mr. Pope after she married him, and then she, because he was interfering in her business, and then she got married to a new man by the name of Mr. Malone, and he also met her skill as well, and they had a good marriage. I think he was very big on the marketing. So it's almost like the Blair Underwood character, the C.J. Walker character has a lot of the characteristics of Malone's actual husband as well. And so as a black woman, Annie Malone, who had her business in St. Louis, she ended up touring the nation door to door because she really couldn't get into distribution because she was black and not white. So she had to create her own distribution channels. And in creating her own distribution channels, she started going door to door to sell her product. And as she would go from different cities, both above and below the Mason-Dixon line in the South, she would create saleswomen, a troop of saleswomen to continue to sell her products in those areas that she had already visited. Now, in St. Louis, she did this as well because that's where it started, and that's where she met Sarah Breedlove. And Sarah Breedlove was one of her door-to-door salesmen. Now, here's the problem with the miniseries. The miniseries likes to give you the impression that Sarah Breedlove was just her customer, and that Addie Monroe, because of phenotype issues, colorism issues, would not allow Sarah Breedlove to sell her products. But that's not true. Annie Malone, the real woman, was already in production, was already in distribution, was already in a thriving business, was already making that guap. And she hired Sarah Breedlove, and she mentored Sarah Breedlove. And the model that Madam C.J. Walker began to live, not just in her business, but in her parts of her life, were really based on Annie Malone's life. And so when the miniseries pits them against each other like they were adversaries and like they had issues with colorism. It's just not true. Here's the tip. The issue that the women had, that from what I recall, is they had an issue with Madam C.J. Walker biting Malone's style. Right. So remember just a minute ago I said that Annie Malone had created a model for her business. Well, Madam C.J. Walker followed her model in a sense to a T and created her own company. And so not only did she create her own company, she did something that I've had done similar to me and that I know some other bigger brands have had done to them, where someone comes and makes a product similar to yours and then they name it something similar to yours to create product confusion. Right? It is the reason why we trademark things, why we trademark our names, why Best Buy is trademarked, because somebody else will come and sell electronics and call it Best Buyer. So when you trademark it as Best Buy, it prevents those types of things that cause product or company confusion or identity confusion. It prevents those things from happening so easily. But at the time that these ladies were in business, Madam C.J. Walker, in a sense, bit Malone's style, and it was just a little too close for comfort for her. So she called her, she said that her business practices were a bit fraudulent because Mrs. Malone created her popular wonderful hair grower, whereas Madam C.J. Walker created the wonderful hair straightener. So it created, when you have these women, when you have someone such as a Madam C.J. Walker who was raised up and taught by a Mrs. Malone, then turn around and go do her own thing. Someone like me who has my own thing has no problem with you going and doing your own thing. I want to see you thrive. But when you go and do your own thing and bite off my style so as to divert my business from me into you, oh, now we got a problem. See, because you're coming from ahead. You could try to keep my kids from eating. So it's problematic. That's where the problem was. It wasn't based on race or skin color or physique or any of that. It was based on you are biting my style. You're cramping my style. You're getting a little too close for comfort. And that's the problem, because not only did Madam C.J. Walker in a sense get too close when it came to product, not only was she a bit close because she had learned from Mrs. Malone, but later on Mrs. Malone, she had started schools, and then she had been a very large benefactor to the YWCA of St. Louis. She had done a number of philanthropic things that Madam C.J. Walker later followed that model to do as well. That's why when I say that the model, she somewhat followed her model for life, is that's what she did. And I think in the long term, the real issue was you're just a little too close for comfort, because you got too close when it came to, you were in my enterprise and then you left my enterprise and you used what you learned from my enterprise to come up against me, just in the market, not necessarily in their personal lives. So that was the issue, not phenotype. And it wasn't an issue as to Madam C.J. Walker stealing or even admitting to Mrs. Malone that she stole her formula, because she didn't steal her formula. Like I said, the formula was a very general, well-known, well-used formula by various people at the time, and it was old. So it wasn't like she stole her formula. She tweaked her own version of it, but it was just a little too close for comfort, and so that was part of the problem. Not only that, Madam C.J. Walker, in a sense, marketed herself in a way that was that nowadays we think she's the first black millionaire. That's marketing, whereas Mrs. Malone didn't. Okay, she created Poro, and she's thriving, and she is like stalwart in St. Louis area. I think they have a parade for her every year and all of that. But their marketing was a little different. And so Annie Malone hasn't gotten really the shine that she should have gotten. But I believe both of the women are going to be getting more shine because, as you can see, Octavia Spencer is in this miniseries. And I believe Viola Davis later on this year is going to be bringing out the Annie Turnbull Malone story. So you're going to get to see Mrs. Malone somewhat glorified. Hopefully they don't take too much creative license with that. And so before I go, because I'm getting ready to wrap this up, because it's a bit long, but I think we got time today because we are self-quarantined. But a lot of the characters in Self-Made are really compartmentalized parts of the story, the saga of these two women in a sense. Um, Whereas the young woman that C.J. Walker ends up having an affair with, that was Madam C.J. Walker's top salesperson, in a sense, what she's doing, not saying that Madam C.J. Walker had an affair with anybody, but how she conducted herself with business is, in a sense, what the real issue kind of was with the real Annie Malone, in that her top salesperson defected from her and went to another company. So that's there's kind of like breakouts of the story. They're scattered around in this miniseries. And then also the character played by Bill Bellamy, who is also another beautiful man, is the cousin of Ransom, who was truly Madam C.J. Walker's attorney and became her CEO after she passed on. There is no historic, that I know of, historical record that Sweetness, who was a thug, actually invested in Madam C.J. Walker's company. So there's that. Not only that, Annie Malone going forward was not single. She actually had a very, very public divorce to Mr. Malone, where she ended up giving him a payout of about $200,000 so that he wouldn't be able to take a part of her company. And then she was plagued with a lot of tax issues that aren't portrayed at all in the story, which will probably be portrayed more in the Viola Davis version. Um, let's see here. So yeah, those are some of the problems that I had with Self-Made. And here's a few other things. You know, people had issues with the soundtrack. And I understand that the soundtrack was a bit jarring, but I understand what they were trying to do. A la Underground, where John Legend, I believe, was responsible for the score. I think it was John Legend, either him or Kendrick Lamar, but I think it was John Legend. John Legend was responsible for the score, and he tried to interject more contemporary hip hop rhythms and into the soundtrack with the with the older themes. It worked very well in Underground. I think they tried to do the same thing here in Self-Made, and it didn't work as well. To me, it wasn't as jarring, but it was noticeable. It didn't work as well for me because it seemed like the cadence of the music didn't match the characters. So that was a bit of a problem. Another problem was, there is, not that I know of, I know that Lilia Bundles, who was the daughter, actually it's not Lilia Bundles, it's Lilia McWilliams, who later had a granddaughter named Lilia Bundles, right? But Lilia McWilliams, the daughter of Madam C.J. Walker, is portrayed in the movie as having been married once, and then it's implied that she was a lesbian. Wherein Lilia Bundles was married, I think, at least 3 times, and it does not, records don't show that she had uh, a lesbian, relationship. But then again, you never know. She may have been married she was married 3 times, but she may have been married 3 times and then had a side chick. She may have had all of that, but I think it's problematic for me in that that may or may not have been true. And that's an area of creative license that you really should have proof on, because people don't want to be portrayed as something that they're not. Um, that's the issue through the whole movie or the whole series. But yeah, so that was a bit of an issue. And yeah, there was a lot of other things that I could be picky about, but it was a good miniseries, but there were some problems. And I do hope that in the future we are able to um, be more true to the story. I understand dramatizing the story, but we want to be a little more true to the story, especially when we have that issue with our youth or people who haven't been informed before, running with a miniseries similar as if it's a documentary that's telling you truths. You cannot stand on really anything that was in Self-Made, other than that it was a beautiful black ensemble cast. Okay, so I'm going to stop this right there. Um, Hopefully this is about an hour or so discussion. As always, as I say, I will meet you in the comment section. Let's dialogue about this. If I've said anything wrong or need to be corrected, please correct me nicely, because some of y'all be getting buck. Nicely inform me, inform your fellow viewers of this, and let's have a dialogue about it. And let's talk a little more about the greatness of both of these women, and give people other areas of research. And which reminds me, let me give you these two books really fast. Here's a really good book that you can read to learn more about Miss Annie Turnbull Malone and her history. It is a book called A Friend to All Mankind, Mrs. Annie Turnbull Malone in Pearl College. It is a book from, I think, 2016, written by John H. Whitfield. So that is a very good book for you to read about her. Madam C.J. Walker, a very popular book has been her autobiography, not her autobiography, her biography by her granddaughter, Lilia Walker. And it's called All About Madam C.J. Walker. I keep getting them last names confused. Excuse me, you guys. But it's called All About Madam C.J. Walker. It's by Alilia Bundles. And Alilia Bundles, I believe, is her great granddaughter, if I'm correct. I may have put an extra grade or left a grade out, but it is the granddaughter that was adopted, I believe, in not actually a blood, but that doesn't take anything from her. And then, so that's a good one for Madam C.J. Walker. And then, yeah, look up Annie Turnbull Malone. I mean, she is really someone you want to know about as well, and she has been a great contributor to our society and to the advancement of black women, just as Madam C.J. Walker, who learned from her, was. She was really about raising up even the poorest of the poor into society, and she was about building self-confidence as well. So